Okay, ready? Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Kaylee Walker, and I will be serving as the moderating chair for today's debate, as well as a member of the Person First Language group. The debate at hand is Person First versus Identity First Language. A few ground rules before we start. To submit a clause or a working paper, please raise your group's placard, and I will grant you permission to speak. The time limit for the debate will be 45 minutes. You may begin. I'm granting myself permission to speak. I am going to share a little bit of a background information on the history of Person First Language before the presentation of our arguments. As explained by Gretsch, Collier, and Ollie, 2023, the Person First movement was introduced at the very first self-advocacy conference in 1974. Person First Language encourages the social model of disability. The shift in language emphasizes abilities, not disabilities, and recognizes people with disabilities as valued members of society. The shift in language has also led to policy and legislative changes improving the rights of people with disabilities. We argue that person-first language is more inclusive and is more appropriate to be used in academic and social contexts. I'm also going to present our first argument. It has been proven that person-first language is preferred in academic and professional contexts, as well as more likely to be used by persons with ASD when referring to other persons with ASD. Tabos, Dopiki, and Zimmerman, 2022, conducted a study surveying autism stakeholders. Stakeholders included adults with autism, parents of autistic children, family members, and friends, as well as professionals who work with individuals with autism. The results of the study concluded that professionals such as teachers, therapists, researchers, and clinicians were more likely to use person-first language. The settings in which this language can be seen includes, but is not limited to, hospitals, clinics, schools, and academic settings. This can likely be due to the education and training these professionals receive. A study by Crocker and Smith, 2019, explained that person-first language is taught in most health profession programs and is mandated by scholarly journals. Tabos, Dopiki, and Zimmerman, 2022, explained that the style guides such as the American Psychological Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Medical Association, and the American Speech Language Hearing Associations guide professionals to use person-first language. Not only do style guides encourage the use of this language by professionals, several important acts relating to individuals with disabilities use person-first language. These acts include, but are not limited to, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, Individuals with Disabilities Act, Education Act 1990, and the Developmental Assistance and Bill of Rights Act of 2000. Notably, the study by Tabos, Dopiki, and Zimmerman 2022 also found that persons with ASD were more likely to refer to other persons with ASD using person-first language. While some professionals may argue for the use of identity-first language, it is both appropriate and often required to use person-first language when referring to others in these settings. You may speak.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is JD Abair, and I am speaking in favor of the use of person first language, or PFL for short, which includes language with paraphrasing like person with autism as the preferred approach for communication in clinical, educational, and public context. The use of person first language should be a priority due to aiding in the reduction of stigma, supports of inclusivity, and promote human dignity. While identity preferences are important, the use of a person-first framework offers a more respectful and inclusive baseline for communications, especially in formal settings. Let me begin by introducing the core of this argument, which is language shapes perception. The way one describes another individual can help uplift them, or it can lead to marginalization of the individual. The use of person-first language aids in the separation of the person from the disability, which counters an extended history of dehumanizing labels. By saying a person with autism instead of using autistic person helps reinforce the individual is more than their diagnosis. In Hoffman et al., 2020, a study on college students' perceptions of disability-related language found that participants widely viewed person-first language as a more respectful and appropriate, especially in formal academic and professional context. This suggests that person-first language can foster an inclusive environment, particularly where there's stigmas that still exist. Moreover, Hoffman and colleagues emphasize that person-first language encourages inclusive thinking and provides a standardized, neutral approach to avoid assumptions and promote acceptance across diverse communication settings. The promotion, or another compelling reason for prioritizing person-first language is that it helps preserve dignity. When we say a person with autism, we are linguistically placing the person first before any label or diagnosis. This choice reflects a values-based communication strategy, one that puts humanity in front and center. And Bijusman et al. 2022, a study surveying Dutch adults with autism and parents of autistic individuals revealed a diversity of preferences regarding terminology. While a significant portion of adults on the spectrum prefer identity first language, parents more commonly favored person first language. The researchers concluded that the preference is nuanced, but also recognize that person first language remains a respectful and broadly acceptable default in public and professional domains where individual preferences cannot always be known. Thus, using person first language and settings demonstrates a commitment to treating individuals as people first, even when identity preferences differ across individuals or communities. To conclude my argument, the use of person-first language should be a priority in public educational and clinical contexts due to aiding in the reduction of stigma, encouraging inclusive thinking, and upholding human dignity. As it is seen in both Hoffman et al. 2020 and Bijusman et al. 2022, preferences may vary, but person-first language remains as a respectful, inclusive, and widely accepted framework.
Permission granted, you may speak.
Hi everyone, my name is Elena Polychronis, and I am going to explain the importance of person-first language within the autistic community and why it is widely preferred in terms of promoting interpersonal respect and cultural sensitivity across diverse populations. Person-first language focuses on the individual before their diagnosis, such as saying person with autism rather than autistic person. This recognizes the individuality of each person beyond their diagnosis. Person-first language promotes respect by highlighting that a diagnosis does not define the whole person and supports inclusivity by recognizing the unique cultural and individual experiences of that person. Using person-first language helps create a level of understanding and promotes dignity in the individual across different communities. In Bury 2020, it explores the preferences for identifying terminology in 198 adults with autism. The results of this study show an overwhelming preference for person-first language with the term person on the spectrum being the least offensive and the highest preferred. The results from this study also show that the preference for person-first language among the autistic community has to do with the stigma that society places on autism. People with autism often deal with unfair stigma in our society. Oftentimes, others make assumptions about what they can or can't do, or judge them based on stereotypes rather than who they really are. Person-first language helps push back against that. When we say person with autism, we're putting the focus and emphasis on the individual, not the label. In Gretsch, L.B. Kohler, D. Ollie, 2024, it shows an overwhelming preference for person-first language when referring to self and when referring to others. This study is conducted in a 42-item survey format and takes age, gender, and into consideration and still shows a 73.4 preference for person-first language when referring to self and others. However, there is also a high amount of individuals who prefer identity-first language at 42.2%, because to them, autism is just as much a part of their identity as their individuality. To conclude, when referring to individuals who are part of the autistic community, it is important to learn personal preferences because it differs from person to person, and it is ultimately up to them what they prefer since they are the ones who are part of the autistic community.
Permission granted, you may speak.
Thank you. My name is Samantha Bell, and I will be introducing identity first language. Identity first language is a subject of ongoing debate within the disability and advocacy communities. These conversations stem from the opposing views on how language shapes identity, dignity, and cultural belonging. Person-first language has historically been promoted by organizations like the American Psychological Association to emphasize individuals before their diagnosis. However, strong assertions regarding identity began in the 1970s with Judy Singer's neurodiversity movement. This is where the celebration of our differences was encouraged alongside our humanity. The conceptualization of what it means to have an autism diagnosis and not wish to repress that portion of our makeup was brought to life with the coining of the term neurodiverse, thus sparking a modern movement of reclaiming both our humanity and diagnosis as a package of our identity and not separate. Um,
Commissioner, you may speak.
Beginning in the 1990s, many disabled advocates began challenging the assumption made by organizations regarding how they've been categorized, arguing that it implies that their conditions are something inherently negative and requires treatment or curing. As the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 1997 were signed into law, a cultural movement towards recognizing disability as an important aspect of identity began. This shift in language continues to challenge how these labels reflect and shape how society values and communicates about different abilities. If you want to take the argument a step further, we can examine crip theory, which is a conglomerate of diverse perspectives regarding the destabilization of either or identities. This movement challenges what society has deemed as normal or right concerning marginalized groups of individuals, including those in the queer and disabled communities. This is a more radical movement seeking to dismantle the societal expectations that being non-disabled is the obvious desired state of existence. Rounding back to the identity first debate, language is a core component of identity and communication. Self-designation is a powerful aspect of identity shaping and breaks down barriers placed around disabled people that were historically put in place to dehumanize, minimize, and exclude them. Speaker.
I think Kaylee is frozen, so I'm gonna just give you permission to speak.
Okay, perfect. Hi, I'm Kobe Creighton. I will be building off of what Samantha has said in favor of identity first language. Building off what Samantha has previously stated, words and language are a powerful tools for individuals to express themselves and the ideas that they may have. Language and the meanings behind words impact, develop, and influence the attitudes and belief that we have towards a subject. According to Lydia Brown, many self-advocates within the autism community prefer to use terms such as autistic, autistic person, or autistic individual. This coincides with the understanding that autism is an inherent part of someone's identity, much like when we refer to individuals as Muslims or African American. This also goes towards people who use identity first to describe their preferences, such as gay, lesbian, athletic, or gifted. Furthermore, this also fosters self-empowerment as it reclaims the narrative that surrounds autism that has been previously placed in the past. An important quote as well that had a lot of value to me that was again stated by Lydia Brown was, "It is impossible to affirm the value or worth of an autistic person without recognizing his or her identity as an autistic person." Referring to me as a person with autism or an individual with ASD demeans who I am because it denies who I am, end quote. This was very powerful to me because having autism is a part of who people are. It does not define who they are, but it is a part of them for their entire life. So to deny their identity to autism would be to deny who they are as a person. Stating autistic person recognizes, affirms, and validates a person's identity and experience as an autistic person. In this, we can realize the value and worth of that individual while simultaneously recognizing that being autistic is not a condition that is irreconcilable. In using identity first language, we affirm the growth and ability to overcome challenges that autistic individuals may face.
It looks like Kaylee is having some technical difficulties, so I'm just going to I'm going to act as the moderator, giving you permission to speak.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to offer my rebuttal. to first person or person first language. When we say a person with autism, that can allude to the idea that having autism is an unfortunate or bad thing. This can create the narrative that someone would be better off if they did not have it, or that their life would be better if they were typical. In this, we are suppressing an individual's identity by alluding to the idea that having autism is inherently bad. Moreover, an example that I had more so educated myself on was when someone has cancer, we refer to them as a person with cancer, which is using first language. Cancer is a disease that can cause vast amounts of physical and emotional distress, as well as it can be deadly. There's nothing positive or meaningful about cancer, and is also not a part of someone's identity or influences the way they neurologically understand the world around them. Autism, however, is a disorder, not a disease. It is a disability that is lifelong, but it is not harmful or deadly on its own accord. Autism is meaningful and can be positive towards a person's identity, as well as it does influence the way that these individuals view the world around them. To conclude, identity first language gives the power of words back to those in the autism community. Language is a powerful tool, as I've previously stated, and in such phrases such as autistic person, it gives the power back to those individuals, as well as rewrites the narrative that society has previously placed on the autistic community. Furthermore, this language encourages the idea that autism is not a negative, irreconcilable disease, rather a disability that is capable of many great things. One thing that is important to mention, though, as previously stated by Elena in her conclusion, is that it's not up for us to decide which is better, but is up for the autism community and which language they align with best. Each individual has different opinions and preferences, but that is not for any of us to decide. On the slide that you were looking at before you, there are pros for each side as what people feel that their language of choice best affirms and identifies for them.
Perfect. So now we are going to open up the floor to questions from both person first language and identity first language. If anybody would like to start, they can raise their cards and I can give you permission to speak. Permission granted.
Okay, so coming from a person first perspective, how would you approach conversations with a client who prefers identity first language and terms?
Permission granted, Kaylee.
We would completely respect the client's preference and autonomy over their own identity. We would then explain that our initial instinct is to use person first language because of our academic backgrounds and professional requirements. We would reiterate that the client's preference comes first, regardless of our previous education. As in the field of applied behavior analysis, we value client centered care, and it is all about the client.
Permission granted, Samantha.
My question is, do you think that using person-first language influences treatment plans and goal setting within applied behavior analysis? And if you do, how do you think that it influences it?
I'm gonna give myself permission to speak. Yes, we do think that using person first language can influence treatment plans and goal setting within applied behavior analysis. So it does depend on the mindset and values of the practitioner and the broader service culture. Through person first language, you focus more on the individual as a whole instead of just their diagnosis. So through this, it can lead to more individualized treatment plans and goal setting because again, you're focusing on the person and you're individualizing the treatment plan and goals to fit their unique needs. It can also promote dignity, respect, and autonomy because it gives the client and the person a choice to be able to have some say in the care that they are receiving and let people know what is important to them and what goals that they have for themselves through ABA. Permission granted.
When using identity first language, does it empower individuals by affirming their personal experiences, or could there be a possibility of risk when it comes to essentializing their disability as a defining characteristic?
Permission granted.
So identity first language is often used as a form of empowerment and to rewrite predisposed narratives that were once placed in the autism community. However, this is up for the individual and client preferences. They should always be the priority. Some view identity first language as taking away from who they are, but others feel the opposite. Again, just reiterating that respecting every individual's preference for how they would like to be identified and communicated to and about is always top priority within the ABA community and across most medical professions.
Permission granted.
For my second question, for language policies in the clinical, educational, and public settings, should they reflect the preferences of disability self-advocates, even in situations where those preferences conflict with the longstanding institutional guidelines like those from the American Psychology Association?
Permission granted.
Um, to answer this question, we as practitioners, our main priority should always be our clients, their needs, and their preferences. So, regardless of any personal beliefs or biases or what may be in like some institutional guidelines, if a client is specifically requesting us to refer to them as a certain way or using a certain form of language, it is in their best interest and ours as practitioners to provide for them what they prefer, as they are our top priority in all ways, shapes, and forms.
Permission granted.
To expand off of what Kobe had just said, it is within our, ethical guidelines to respect how our clients wish to be addressed, how they want us to proceed with any treatment plans, all of that. So again, as Kobe had said, we need to check our biases and our beliefs at the door whenever we are meeting with our clients.
I'm gonna hold this up and give myself permission. I want to open it up back to the identity first language, and ask you guys the same question that you asked us about, do you think that using person first or identity first language influences treatment plans and goal settings within ABA? If so, how do you think it influences it? Permission granted.
I believe that it can definitely influence treatment plans and goal setting. Just previously stated, it's essentially the same answer goes on both sides. That if it what is what makes a client feel more comfortable, and that's how they prefer to be referred to as, and that's what has us have a mutual respect and understanding with one another, it is absolutely our duty to put their preferences and their needs and wants first. So, in implementing that within their treatment plans and their goal setting, clients are going to feel more welcome and respected in their journey of behavior analysis.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I will give myself permission to speak and just open it up to kind of an open-ended question. And I can kind of give my 2 cents on what I think. But when navigating the autistic community and how many different preferences people have, um, I'm just curious on if we as practitioners have ideas on how we can ensure that we're respecting the preferences of all of our clients and making sure that we are addressing them how they want to be addressed. I personally think that it's very important to just ask the question. I think a lot of the times people can get nervous to ask because it is definitely a sensitive subject, just because everybody has very different opinions, different preferences. So I think just communication from the very start is one of the most important things that we as practitioners can do to make sure that we are addressing people with the correct language, whether that's person first or whether that's identity first, because it is such a polarizing topic. So if anybody else has any ideas, I'd be curious to hear. Yeah, permission granted.
I just kind of wanted to ask for a little bit more of an elaboration. You said it is difficult, and I totally agree with you. It's difficult to ask those hard questions about how people want to be referred to, especially whenever it is calling into question someone's identity. Do you believe that that is a difficult question to ask because of societal pressures of having any kind of disability, having that big negative connotation. Do you believe that that's why it makes practitioners uncomfortable or strangers uncomfortable to ask those questions?
I'll give myself permission. Yeah, I think that as a society, there's a big emphasis placed on people wanting to feel heard and valued. And I think that as a practitioner, sometimes it can be uncomfortable because sometimes you don't know if the person is going to have a major preference. I think some people can, in a lot of the studies that we read, people can go either way with identity first or person first. So I think a lot of the times as practitioners, where it gets kind of difficult asking that question is because you don't want to open up a door if the client doesn't really care. And you don't want to, I mean, I think pushing the stigma and like the emphasis on having to choose either identity first or person first can make a client uncomfortable if they just don't really care. But again, I think that the most important part is just open communication, and going about that conversation in a way that's not like, you have to tell me right now, do you want me to refer to you as a person with autism or an autistic person? It doesn't have to be such like a black and white situation of you tell me right now what you want. But yeah, I think that sometimes the societal pressure of making sure that we are taking into account people's preferences and understanding some people are going to have a higher preference than others, and some people can go either way. So I think that's kind of where it makes it a little bit difficult for practitioners. Permission granted.
Yes, I did have one more question. A lot of what I had seen within the research for this was how trauma informs how individuals with disabilities prefer to be identified. Um, what does that look like within the autism community? The traumas. Sorry, I know that was a very big question.
Um, Permission granted.
Okay, could you possibly elaborate more on like what you're referring to, such as like the traumas in regarding like the autism community? Are you more so referring to how like, for example, people on social media will use these terms as a way to oppress or offend other people? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, I am referring to the oppression, the stigmatization around having disabilities, specifically having autism, the misconceptions of the lack of intelligence, the lack of empathy. The list can go on and on about all of the negatives that people can list off whenever somebody hears that an individual has an autism diagnosis. I'm just curious how others view. Um, how we talk about people on the spectrum that have trauma and how they prefer, how does that influence how they want to be identified? I guess is what I'm really asking.
Um, if I have an idea, if nobody else has one right now, I think that trauma within individuals who have an autism diagnosis can definitely influence whether they prefer person first language or identity first language. I think sometimes with the stigma that has is placed on individuals with an autism diagnosis can steer people away from wanting to be referred to by identity first because they want to be separate from their diagnosis because I think it kind of helps them separate the stigma. So they don't want to be called in a lot of the studies that I read, they don't want to be called an autistic person or an autistic individual because they already are feeling that kind of stigmatization against them. So they'd rather be referred to by person first language as who they are as a person. And then, yes, they do have autism, but that's kind of a lot of the benefit of person first language is you don't have to say they are a person with autism. You can just say that they are a person. And then in different settings, yes, they are a person with autism. But I think that to go back to your question about the trauma, I think some people do prefer person first language because they already feel that being autistic is kind of associated with a bad thing. So as they can be referenced as an individual first, I think that's kind of a benefit to person first language.
Fantastic.
Permission granted.
Okay, building off of what Elena has just said, I very much agree that the trauma that has been within the community and in modern day that has been placed upon the autism community is definitely a very valid thing. And I do believe that that is why many people may steer away from identity first, especially off bat. What I have learned through this research project is that many people do prefer identity first language, on the other hand, as a way of taking that power back and rewriting that narrative. Being able to refer to themselves as an autistic individual is their own way of reducing the stigma and rewriting like predisposed like ideas and stigmas and things that were placed upon them that may not even apply to them because they're just so stereotyped. So that's just their way of taking back that power and rewriting the narrative and embracing who they are, as it's not something like it's a lifelong disability. So it's just them embracing themselves, and as well as many people, it allows them to have a community to turn to when they feel like they don't have anybody else. They have people to relate to, and like the self-empowerment and much acceptance. And also using this identity first language is respecting the identity and demonstrates cultural humility towards these individuals. But again, it's always up to what a client prefers. But I definitely do think the trauma has had a large impact on what language people prefer, but I think it's kind of gone on two opposite ends of the spectrum. People either want to steer away from that to be away from the stigma, but some people are wanting to go full force into it to embrace it and rewrite that narrative that they didn't even create for themselves.
I really like your response, Kobe, and I think that through all of the arguments and information that we just learned about person first language and identity first language, I want to open it up to a vote for everyone. As we did state before, it is 100% up to the individual to decide what they want to be referred to as. So in that, I'm going to abstain my vote because I don't think that it's up to anybody else besides the individual to decide. So I don't think person first language or identity first language is necessarily better than the other. So with that, I'm abstaining my vote. I want to open up the floor to you guys. Permission granted.
Just like you said, I'm going to abstain my vote just because I agree with the fact that it is up to the individual to make that decision as to what they want to be referred to ultimately.
Perfect. Permission granted.
I will also be abstaining my vote. I am of the variety that every person gets to choose their own identity and how they are spoken to and about. So, yeah.
Permission granted.
I will also be abstaining my vote today just because I believe that is our utmost priority to respect what our client prefers. And as somebody who is not in the community, it is not for me to decide which is better, which is right or wrong. And I believe that every person and their preferences and what aligns with them best is to be respected.
Awesome. Permission granted.
I will also be abstaining my vote. Going off of what Kobe just said, it is completely up to the person. And specifically in this field, we value client-centered care, and the client is the center of that. So we want to respect their preferences. And so I will be abstaining my vote.
Perfect. I'm going to go back to the slides and just show our references really quickly. So it looks like all 5 of us abstained our votes. Again, that was very informative for both sides to see just see the pros and cons to both. So I appreciate hearing all of your guys' sides and arguments. In the end, again, it's up to the individual whether they prefer person first language or identity first language. I am going to stop my screen share. And I'm going to stop the recording here. So thank you for listening and thank you guys so much for participating.